All right, today we want to talk about this book known as Umdat al Tafaaseer or Mukhtasar Tafsir ibn Kathir or Tafsir al-Quran al-Azim. And this is going to be a 2-for-1 because we're going to talk about the original work as well as the abridgment. The original work was written by Ibn Kathir, who was born in around the year 1300 in the city of Mijdal on the outskirts of Busra in Syria. His name was Ismail ibn Umar ibn Kathir, and he was known by his technonym or his kunya, Abu al-Fida. And he also had an honorary title, which was very, part of the course for that age, Imad ad-Din, the pillar of faith. He's perhaps one of the best known scholars from the 8th century, the 14th century, to both layman and specialist alike. Say the word Ibn Kathir, most people know who you're talking about. He married the daughter of al-Mizzi, one of the foremost scholars of hadith in Syria in that period and probably in the history of hadith. In 1345, he was designated as the chief orator, khatib, at the Grand Mosque in Mizza, his father-in-law's hometown. In 1366, he gained a professorial position at the Great Mosque of Damascus, and he was universally praised and recognized by his teachers and his peers. Al-Dhahabi said about him, he was a jurist, the mufti, and the hadith scholar, one with numerous virtues. As-Suyuti said about his tafsir, he has a tafsir which no other tafsir compares to. He was Salafi in his aqidah, and he was Shafi'i in his legal madhab, in his legal school. Ibn Hajar mentions in Ad-Durr al-Kamina, under the biography of Ibn al-Qayyim's son, Ibrahim, that he and Ibn Kathir had a dispute, near the end of which Ibn Kathir said to him, أَنْتَ تَكْرَهُنِي لِأَنَّنِي أَشْعَرِي. You don't like me just because I'm an Ash'ari. To which Ibrahim replied, لو كان جسمك كله شعر من الرأس إلى القدم لما صدقك أحد بأنك أشعري وشيخك ابن تيمية. If your body were covered in hair, sha'ar, from head to toe, no one would believe that you're an Ash'ari while your sheikh is Ibn Taymiyyah. Now, some have used this to claim that Ibn Kathir was an Ash'ari, and in reality, anyone who's read his works, the tafsir, his books on hadith, and others, his history, knows that this cannot be farther from the truth. A cursory glance at his work show this, as well as, for example, you can look at the tafsir of Surah Ash-Shura, verse 11. So, what's going on here with this story that Ibn Hajar mentions about Ibn Kathir? Well, Ibn Kathir is the head scholar of the Dar al-Hadith al-Ashrafiyya, which was a waqf, an endowment, and a school. And the condition placed by the founder of that school was that it had to be headed up by an Ash'ari. So in that sense, Ibn Kathir was an Ash'ari in that he followed the aqidah of Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari himself, which dictates following the sunnah and the way of the salaf, not the formalized theology that later became known as Ash'arism or al-Ash'ariyya. Not the formalized theology that was informed by Kalam theology. Now, before someone says that Ibn Kathir's assuming this position necessitates that he was an Ash'ari, because Ibn Subki, champion of the Ash'aris of his time, said that the head of the Ashrafiyya had to be one, remember that Ibn Subki himself records the same controversy about his own teacher and Ibn Kathir's father-in-law, al-Mizzi, who was head of the Dar al-Hadith al-Ashrafiyya before him. In fact, Ibn Subki mentions that his own father, who was friends with al-Mizzi and who would even read to him at times and take his own students to go and study with him, was approached by Sadr al-Din al-Maliki, one of the Maliki scholars of that time, and asked to remove al-Mizzi from the position because he was not an Ash'ari, stating that because although al-Mizzi wrote that when he applied that he was an Ash'ari, no one believed this to be true. So on the application he wrote down that he was this attribute. Taqi al-Subki, the father, he was left speechless when Sadr al-Din mentioned to this, and he said, this is the Imam of the Hadith scholars. By God, if ad-Daraqutni was alive today, he'd be shy to teach in his place. This is mentioned in Tabaqat al-Shafi'iyya. Later in the conversation with his son, he said, I know what Sadr al-Din was implying, but who can dare say that al-Mizzi isn't fit to lead the Dar al-Hadith? Not even this pillar can carry the weight of this statement. Ibn Subki then commented saying, look at the great admiration that he had for al-Mizzi. After al-Mizzi's death, the position remained open for a while, and the position was presented or offered to Al-Dhahabi, who refused it because he refused to write on the application that he was an Ash'ari. After this, Ibn Kathir took the position, and we can assume that he took the same stance as his father-in-law, using the term Ash'ari as an equivocality, a word or phrase susceptible to double interpretation. The second possibility is that Ibn Kathir was simply joking with a friend. It was a quip that he made about himself to end a dispute with a friend, who then replied in an equally jovial manner, playing on the word Ash'ari and Sha'ar, recognizing that the argument was done. My opinion personally is it was both. Ibn Kathir probably did this like his father-in-law in order to be able to teach there, and then he quipped about it with his friend. Now, this is one episode from his life, and it's an interesting episode. Later in life, Ibn Kathir lost his eyesight, which actually he attributes to working late night on the Musnad of Imam Ahmed, attempting to reorder it according to topic. And in fact, Ibn Kathir wrote a book called Jami' al-Masanid, where he tried to gather all of the books of hadith in one magnum opus. He died in 1373 in Damascus, and he was buried next to his teacher, Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. Much more could be said about his bio, but we'll leave it there and perhaps tell a little bit more about his story when we review some of his other books. Ibn Kathir wrote many books. He wrote this one, Tafsir al-Quran al-Azim. He wrote Al-Bidayah wal-Nihaya in history, Ikhtisar Ulum al-Hadith in Mustalah, or the science of hadith, Al-Fusul fi Sirat al-Rasul in Sirah, and of course this one. Now this copy here is an abridgment of Ibn Kathir's work by the great scholar of hadith from the last century, Ahmed Shakir. Ahmed Muhammad Shakir was born in 1892 and he died in 1956. He was a prolific writer and editor of classical text, and perhaps when I do a review of his edition of the Risala of Imam al-Shafi'i, I'll go into a little bit more detail about his life and times and works, because he himself had a very interesting life. So why do I like this book? Well, first, it's by Ahmed Shakir. He's an amazing individual, and his works stand out on their own. Second, it's an abridgment of Ibn Kathir, possibly one of the most widespread works on tafsir ever, after shorter works like Tafsir al-Jalalain and maybe al-Baghawi. And I mention this because recently there's been a lot of chatter about how Ibn Kathir's work really wasn't that well known, really wasn't that well read, or really wasn't widespread. I'd say that when we look to the statements of Ibn Hajar, who commented on Ibn Kathir's life, he mentions that in his own lifetime, Ibn Kathir's works became read and widespread. Additionally, the numerous manuscripts of his books in libraries around the world, some adding material, some leaving them off, gives credence to what Ibn Hajar said. And it also shows that they gained prominence during his lifetime, meaning that in order for there to be different manuscripts with additions and subtractions, it had to have been copied many times over, and some of those copies happening at different times of his life when he was teaching the book at different times. The Fihras al-Shamil, or the Al-Bayt Concordance of Manuscripts from Jordan, puts copies of this book, Tafsir al-Quran al-Azim, at about 67 different manuscripts. Some modern editors of the book claim that they have up to hundreds of manuscripts for the book. That shows in itself that the book was well received, and it wasn't something that was only brought to light in the modern period. Now, why do I like this book? Well, Shakir himself mentions why he abridged the book, and I think this is an important reason. He said, "I personally do not like to summarize books or change them in any way from how they were originally written. However, I saw the need to present to the literate and educated masses who have not dove into the depths of knowledge and its intricacies and technical terms, as well as beginning students of knowledge, an approachable text." So what has he done in the summary or in this abridgment to make it approachable? Well, first, he preserves the structure and the statements and the overall tone of Ibn Kathir's original work, actually referencing some of the manuscripts when doing this. And this is something that al-Mubarakfuri and Muhammad Ali al-Sabuni, rahimahullah's works generally do not do. Second, Ahmed Shakir, being a scholar of hadith himself, abridges the sometimes lengthy mention of ahadith and athar and the related discussions about them, sufficing himself with the strongest narrations for each evidence that Ibn Kathir mentions. Additionally, he deletes the chains of narration and then references the books that they're narrated from, which is really handy because many times you don't need to read the chain of narration if the hadith is, say, from a Bukhari or Muslim or a well-known book of hadith. Third, He deletes the weak or fabricated hadith that are mentioned, if they were, and if authentic hadith are mentioned in their place. If not, he will actually mention those weak narrations, clarify their status, and then clarify why Ibn Kathir was mentioning them, because perhaps they contain information or additional phrases that aren't found in the more authentic literature. And this is one of the original reasons why Ibn Kathir mentions them to begin with. Fourth, he summarizes the repetition that's found in the opinions of the companions and the tabi'een, usually mentioning some but not all of them, all of those that Ibn Kathir had mentioned. Additionally, he removes all of the Isra'iliyat narrations. Now, to me, this is not necessarily a plus, because I think it's important to understand Isra'iliyat with tafsir, but for the layperson who can't discern between a hadith and an Isra'iliyat report, this is helpful. Now, what is an Isra'iliyat report? It's a report that is narrated from the people of the book, the Jews and the Christians that came before the Prophet ﷺ. And so there's a lot of interpolation, there's a lot of conjecture and hearsay that comes in those reports, not only because of the nature of the report, but the nature of how they were. Now, Shakir claims to do this because Ibn Kathir himself disparages such reports in numerous places of his book, and he comments on the mistakes of those that narrate them and basically laments their presence in the books of tafsir. So Sheikh Ahmed Shakir rahimahullah said, let's just take them out completely. 6, he summarized the legal, theological, and linguistic discussions that sometimes become so lengthy that you lose sight of what they were mentioned for in the first place. Also, if there's a lengthy hadith that was mentioned and only part of it's relevant to the tafsir of a particular verse, then he mentions only what's relevant. And of course, as before, he references back to the books of hadith. He does the same with historic events that Ibn Kathir mentions as well. So this book is great for the person who wants to read tafsir, informed by the primary text of Islam, but does not want to wade through the endless pages of narrations and analysis. I personally use this when I prepare my tafsir classes. I use it it's one of the first books that I reference along with Tafsir al-Baydawi. Those are the 2 first books that I reference in order to understand the general meanings of a particular verse, and then I go into other books that are probably more lengthy, like At-Tahrir wa Tanweer and At-Tabari and others. So if you've enjoyed this video, please like it and subscribe. Share it with your friends. Let me know in the comments what interested you about this book, the topics mentioned in it, or maybe even some of the other abridgments of Tafsir ibn Kathir that you've read and you think are comparable or better or worse than this one. I'll see you next time inside my library.